"Shut your mouth, boy. You don't tell me who you are, I tell you what you are." Captain George Vance spat, his heavy knee digging brutally into the center of Robert's spine. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit deep into Robert's wrists, grinding against the bone as his face was pressed into the rough, unforgiving asphalt. "I am a federal agent," Robert gasped, his voice dangerously calm despite the blood pooling in his cheek. "And you just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life." 6 hours later, a precinct door would be kicked off its hinges. 17 badges would be stripped forever, and a city would burn through $10 million in a single afternoon. Welcome to the story of the day corrupt cops pulled over the wrong man. The fatting amber sunlight of a Tuesday evening cast long, deceptive shadows over the manicured lawns of Oakage, a wealthy, insular suburb where the houses were massive. The crime rate was effectively zero, and the local police force operated like a private, heavily armed country club. Robert Hayes was not from Oakage. He didn't look like Oakage. At 42 years old, standing 62 with shoulders carved from years of rigorous physical conditioning, the black man, wearing a faded gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn-in running shoes stood out like a siren in the quiet neighborhood. But Robert wasn't there to rob the sprawling estates or disturb the peace. He was a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, deeply embedded in a 3-year racketeering and financial fraud case. One of his primary targets, a corrupt hedge fund manager, lived in the sprawling mansion at the end of the Culdic. Robert was simply taking a 20-minute walking break from his unmarked surveillance van, parked 3 blocks away, stretching his legs and clearing his head before a long night of logging wire taps. He had just turned the corner onto Elm Street, his hands casually tucked into the front pocket of his hoodie when the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. 20 years of law enforcement instinct flared to life. He didn't need to turn around to know what was creeping up behind him. He could hear the distinct heavy roll of police cruiser tires on the pavement, the engine idling low, matching his walking pace. Robert kept his eyes forward, his breathing steady. He knew the drill. He knew the unwritten rules of being a black man in a neighborhood that didn't want him there. A short chirp of the police siren pierced the quiet air. Red and blue lights flashed, reflecting off the pristine white picket fences. "You there, stop walking." The voice over the cruiser's PA system was sharp, nasal, and dripping with unearned authority. Robert stopped. He didn't turn suddenly. He slowly removed his hands from his hoodie pocket, keeping his palms open and visible, and pivoted on his heel. Stepping out of the driver's side of the cruiser was Officer Nicole. She was young, barely 24, with a tight, high ponytail and a hand already resting nervously on the butt of her service weapon. Her knuckles were white. She had been on the force for barely a year, but she had already fully absorbed the toxic, hyper-aggressive culture cultivated by her precinct captain. "Can I help you, officer?" Robert asked, his voice a calm, deep baritone that usually commanded immediate respect in federal interrogation rooms. "I said, keep your hands where I can see them." Nicole barked, her voice cracking slightly as she closed the distance, stopping 10 ft away. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "Taking a walk," Robert replied evenly. "Is walking against the municipal code in Oakage?" "Don't get smart with me," Nicole snapped, her eyes darting nervously over his athletic frame. "We got a call about a suspicious individual matching your description, looking into car windows." Robert knew instantly it was a lie. There had been no call. He had been walking in a straight line for 4 blocks and hadn't come within 20 ft of a parked car. It was a pretext stop, a classic, lazy, racially motivated fishing expedition. "I haven't looked into any cars, officer," Robert said, his tone remaining deliberately flat. He knew that any spike in emotion, any sign of frustration would be weaponized against him. "If you'd like, I can show you my identification. It's in my back right pocket." "Do not move," Nicole shrieked, unclipping the retention strap on her holster. Before Robert could speak again, a massive black SUV with flashing lights roared around the corner, screeching to a halt at an angle, blocking the entire street. The doors flew open, and Captain George Vance stepped out. George was a man who looked exactly like his reputation. A thick neck, a face permanently flushed with high blood pressure and rage, and a uniform stretched tight over a barrel chest. He had run the Oakage Police Department through fear and intimidation for a decade. He was a man who believed the law was whatever he said it was at any given moment. "What do we got, Nicole?" George bellowed, strutting toward Robert with the swagger of a warlord. Suspicious male captain refusing to comply, acting combative. Nicole lied effortlessly, emboldened by her commander's presence. Robert's jaw tightened. "I haven't refused a single order. I offered to show my ID." "Shut your mouth, boy," George spat, stepping uncomfortably close to Robert, invading his personal space. The smell of stale coffee, winter-green chewing tobacco, and unchecked ego rolled off him. "You don't tell me who you are. I tell you what you are. Turn around and put your hands on the hood of the cruiser now." Robert considered his options. He could announce he was an FBI agent right now loudly, but he was deep undercover. Blowing his cover for a traffic stop could jeopardize a 3-year federal investigation. Furthermore, looking at the wild, predatory gleam in George's eyes, Robert knew that reaching for his badge right now might get him shot. George was looking for an excuse to escalate. Robert decided to play the civilian. He would let them take him in, get to the station, and quietly dismantle them legally. "I am complying," Robert said softly, turning around and placing his hands flat on the cold metal of the cruiser's hood. Instantly, George kicked Robert's legs apart with brutal force. Nicole grabbed Robert's left arm, wrenching it behind his back with unnecessary violence, pushing his shoulder joint to the absolute limit. "Stop resisting," George yelled purely for the benefit of the dash cam as he slammed his heavy forearm into the back of Robert's neck, forcing his face down against the hood. "I am not resisting," Robert stated firmly, grimacing against the pain. George swept Robert's legs entirely. The world tipped sideways. Robert hit the rough asphalt hard, his cheek scraping against the gravel, drawing immediate blood. The breath was knocked from his lungs. In seconds, George's massive knee dropped like an anvil onto Robert's lower spine, pinning him to the ground. The cold steel of handcuffs bit mercilessly into his wrists, ratcheted so tight they instantly cut off his circulation. "Got him," Nicole panted, stepping back, looking flushed and triumphant. Across the street, hidden behind the thick trunk of a grand oak tree and a parked Prius, 19-year-old Brittany held her breath. A college sophomore had been studying in her bedroom when she heard the sirens. She had slipped out the side door, her smartphone already recording. Her hands shook as she captured every second of the unprovoked assault in crystal-clear 4K video. She watched in horror as the giant police captain ground the calm, compliant man into the dirt. "You have the right to remain silent," George sneered, leaning his weight into Robert's back. "I suggest you use it because nobody out here cares what you have to say." Robert turned his head slightly, ignoring the stinging pain in his cheek, his dark eyes locking onto George's boots. "You have no idea," Robert thought, his mind already shifting from victim to federal investigator. "You have absolutely no idea what you just did." The back of the Oakage police cruiser smelled intensely of vomit, cheap bleach, and despair. The hard plastic seat offered no comfort as the vehicle careened around tight suburban corners, intentionally taking the turns too fast. Every sharp swerve threw Robert's broad shoulders violently against the plexiglass divider, his handcuffed wrists screaming in agony behind his back. He didn't make a sound. Through the grated window, he could hear Captain George and Officer Nicole laughing in the front seats. "Did you see the look on his face?" Nicole chuckled, the adrenaline still clearly pumping through her veins. "Thought he was tough. They always think they're tough until they eat pavement." "Just another moot wandering out of his lane," George grunted, adjusting his mirrored sunglasses, even though the sun had already set. "We'll hit him with resisting, loitering. Maybe assault on a police officer if my knuckles start to bruise. Let him rot in county for the weekend. That'll teach him to walk through my town." Robert closed his eyes and began to control his breathing. In 4 seconds, hold 4 seconds, out 4 seconds. The tactical box breathing technique he had learned at Quantico slowed his heart rate. He detached himself from the physical pain and the burning humiliation. He began to build a mental dossier. He memorized their badge numbers, the cruiser designation, the exact time of the stop, and every single word they had uttered. They thought they had caught a defenseless civilian. They had actually just trapped themselves in a cage with a federal apex predator. 30 mi away in the sterile, high-tech environment of the FBI Regional Field Office, the atmosphere was entirely different. Supervisory Agent Monica Sterling sat at a curved bank of monitors, her eyes scanning streams of data. Monica was a force of nature, brilliant, fiercely protective of her team, and possessing a temper that terrified even the bureau director. She and Robert had been partners for 10 years before she moved to command. She knew his rhythms better than she knew her own husband's. A small digital timer in the corner of her primary screen flashed red. 1900 hours. Robert was late. During undercover surveillance operations, agents were required to double-click their covert comms every 60 minutes to signal all clear. Robert had never missed a check-in in his entire career. Monica frowned, her fingers flying across her mechanical keyboard. Comms. Ping Agent Hayes' secure device, she ordered into her headset. Pinging now, Agent Sterling, a technician replied from across the bullpen. GPS locator is moving. He's traveling east at 45 mph. He's supposed to be stationary in the surveillance van on Elm Street, Monica muttered, a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. Is he in his vehicle? Negative. His vehicle's GPS is stationary on Elm. The movement is coming from his personal phone in his pocket. Monica's eyes narrowed. If Robert was moving without his van, without radioing in, something was critically wrong. Cross-reference his current trajectory with local municipal assets. Where is he going? The computer hummed for 3 agonizing seconds. Trajectory indicates he is en route to the Oakage Municipal Police Department. Monica froze. Oakage PD. She knew their reputation. The Department of Justice had been quietly building a civil rights probe against Captain George Vance for 2 years. Why would Robert go to the Oakage precinct without telling me? She whispered. Then the realization hit her like a physical blow. He didn't go there voluntarily. Get me the Oakage precinct on the line. Right now, Monica commanded, standing up so fast her chair rolled backward and slammed into a glass partition. The entire bullpen went dead silent, turning to look at her, dialing Mom. A moment later, the lazy, bored voice of a desk sergeant echoed in Monica's headset. Oakage PD, hold, please. Do not put me on hold, Monica said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone of absolute chilling authority. This is Supervisory Special Agent Monica Sterling with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak to your watch commander immediately. Yeah, right, and I'm the Queen of England, the desk sergeant scoffed. Call back during business hours, lady. Click. The line went dead. Monica stared at the screen for a fraction of a second, absolute fury igniting in her chest. She slammed her fist onto the desk. He hung up on me. She looked up at the massive digital map on the wall. The blinking green dot representing Robert's phone had just come to a stop inside the perimeter of the Oakage police station. They took him, Monica said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Those small-town idiots just kidnapped an FBI special agent. She turned to her tactical lieutenant. Wake up the special agent in charge. Then get the U.S. attorney on a secure line and gear up the hostage rescue team. We are going to Oakage. The fluorescent lights in the Oakage booking room buzzed with an irritating, relentless hum. Robert was yanked out of the cruiser and shoved through the heavy metal back doors of the precinct. His wrists were bleeding, the metal cuffs having sliced through his skin during the rough ride. Empty your pockets, tough guy, Captain George barked, shoving Robert against the booking counter. Officer Nicole stepped up, roughly patting down Robert's pockets. She pulled out a bundle of keys, a pack of mints, and finally his thick, worn leather wallet. Let's see who we got here, George sneered, snatching the wallet from Nicole's hands. He flipped it open, expecting to find a standard driver's license to run for warrants. Instead, a heavy solid gold shield caught the harsh overhead light, gleaming brilliantly. Beside it was a rigid federally issued identification card bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice, a barcode, and a holographic overlay protecting Robert's stern photo. Supervisory Special Agent Robert Hayes, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The booking room went completely silent. The desk sergeant, who had just hung up on Monica 5 minutes earlier, stopped chewing his gum. Clear's throat officer Nicole's eyes widened, her face draining of all color as she stared at the gold shield. Her breath hitched. "Captain," Nicole whispered, her voice trembling. "Captain, that's a federal badge." George stared at the credentials. For a split second, a flicker of genuine terror crossed his flushed face. But George Vance was a man entirely ruled by his ego. He had spent 10 years never being wrong, never backing down, and never being held accountable. His mind, unable to process the magnitude of the disaster he had just created, instantly sought a delusion to protect itself. He burst out laughing. It was a harsh, forced sound. He slapped the wallet down on the counter. "Oh, this is rich. This is beautiful," George bellowed, looking around the room at his bewildered officers. "You see this, Nicole? This is why you got to be sharp. This moot actually bought a fake FBI badge off the internet." "Captain, it looks really real," the desk sergeant said nervously, leaning over the counter. "It has the holographic. It's a prop, you idiot." George snapped, his face re-inning again. He grabbed Robert by the back of the hoodie and slammed him face first into the counter. "You think you're smart, boy? You think flashing a little tin is going to scare me now? I'm adding felony impersonation of a federal officer to your sheet. You are going away for a decade." Robert slowly lifted his head. The blood from his scraped cheek had dried, but his eyes were entirely clear, cold, and utterly terrifying. He looked at George not with anger but with the detached pity a scientist might reserve for a doomed insect. "Captain Vance," Robert said, his voice ringing out clearly in the silent room. He didn't yell, he didn't have to. "I'm going to give you one chance." "Exactly one. Look at the back of that. There is a 1-800 number for the DOJ Verification Center. Call it. Read them my badge number, because if you process me into that holding cell, the threshold is crossed, and I promise you by midnight you will not have a career. You will not have a pension, and you will be begging for a plea deal." The absolute certainty in Robert's voice made the hairs on Nicole's arm stand up. She took a slow step backward away from George. "Maybe we should call the number, Captain, just to be sure." "Nobody is calling any number," George roared, slamming his fist on the counter. His authority was being challenged in his own house. He grabbed Robert by the collar. "Take this fake Fed to cell block 4, strip him out. Let him freeze for a few hours. We'll see how tough he is when he's shivering in his underwear." Two large deputies stepped forward, grabbing Robert's arms and dragging him toward the heavy steel door leading to the cages. Robert didn't fight them. As the steel door slammed shut behind him with a resonant final clang, Robert knew the die was cast. They had crossed the threshold. Meanwhile, in the back seat of a black armored SUV, tearing down the interstate at 90 mph an hour, Monica Sterling held a secure satellite phone to her ear. On the other end of the line was Hannah Brooks, the United States Attorney for the district. Hannah was a ruthless prosecutor known for destroying corrupt politicians and cartel bosses alike. She had been awakened from a deep sleep, but upon hearing Monica's rapid briefing, she was instantly, fiercely awake. "Let me get this perfectly clear. Agent Sterling." Hannah's crisp, sharp voice crackled over the speaker. "The Oak Ridge Police Department has kidnapped one of our senior undercover agents, assaulted him, and is currently holding him hostage." "That is correct, Mom," Monica replied, checking her watch. "They have refused all diplomatic contact. They are operating completely off the reservation." "Do you have a tactical team spun up?" Hannah asked. 3 heavily armed HRT units are 10 minutes out from the precinct. I have a helicopter providing overwatch." "Good," the U.S. Attorney said softly. The tone sent shivers down the spine of the driver. "Agent Sterling, I am formally declaring this a federal hostage situation under the jurisdiction of the United States government. You are clear to breach. Do whatever it takes to get our man out. And Monica?" "Yes, Mom. When you secure the building, arrest every single person wearing a badge. I want them all in federal lockup by dawn." "Copy that," Monica said, a grim smile finally touching her lips. She hung up the phone and keyed her radio. "All units, weapons hot. We are taking the station." Cell Block 4 of the Oak Ridge Municipal Police Department was designed to break spirits. There were no windows, only a heavy steel door with a sliding meal slot. The walls were painted a sickening shade of institutional green, that seemed to absorb the weak, flickering light of a single caged fluorescent bulb. The air was frigid, the air conditioning deliberately cranked down to 55 degrees to make the inhabitants as miserable as physically possible. Robert Hayes sat perfectly still on the center of the concrete slab that served as a bed. He had been stripped of his hoodie, his jeans, and his shoes, left wearing only a thin white undershirt and his boxes. His bare feet rested flat on the icy floor. To his left, a rusted metal toilet continuously dripped, the sound echoing sharply in the confined space. He was cold, but he was not broken. Years of specialized training at the FBI Academy in Quantico had taught him how to compartmentalize physical discomfort. He focused his mind inward, slowing his heart rate, pushing the stinging pain in his scraped face and the dull ache in his wrenched shoulder to a dark corner of his brain. He didn't pace. He didn't yell for a lawyer. He didn't bang on the reinforced glass of the door. He simply waited. Robert knew the protocols better than the men who had locked him up. He knew that the moment he missed his 1900 hours check-in, Monica Sterling would have initiated a trace. He knew that by 1915 she would have pinpointed his location, and he knew with absolute unwavering certainty that by 200 hours the full terrifying weight of the United States government would descend upon this building. He just had to survive until the cavalry arrived. Hey, buddy." A raspy whisper echoed from the cell across the narrow corridor. Robert slowly opened his eyes and looked through the thick glass of his door. A skinny man with tangled hair, wearing a grease-stained mechanic's shirt, was pressing his face against the glass of the opposite cell. "You in for drugs?" the man asked, his eyes darting nervously. "Vance's boys love grabbing out-of-towners for drugs. They took my car, said it was civil asset forfeit. I only had a joint on me." "No," Robert replied, his voice a low, steady rumble that carried effortlessly across the silent block. "I was taking a walk." The mechanic scoffed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Yeah, walking while black in Oakage. That's a capital offense to Captain George. You're screwed, man. They'll hold you here for 72 hours before they even let you see a judge. Then they'll slap you with a bunch of bogus resisting charges. You better have a good lawyer." "I have something better," Robert said softly, closing his eyes again. While Robert sat in the freezing dark 2 miles away, 19-year-old Brittany was sitting in the warm, ambient glow of her dual computer monitors, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She had sprinted back into her house after the police cruisers peeled away, her hands shaking so violently she had almost dropped her phone. For 20 minutes, she had sat on the edge of her bed, terrified. She knew Captain George Vance. Everyone in Oakage knew him. He was the kind of man who would ruin your life, plant evidence, or terrorize your family if you crossed him. She was just a college student. Releasing the video could put a target on her back. But as she watched the raw 4K footage on her screen, her fear was slowly eclipsed by a burning, undeniable sense of outrage. She watched the tall, calm man in the gray hoodie comply with every order. She heard the clear, chilling thud of the captain's knee dropping onto his spine. She heard the man's gasping voice. "I am a federal agent." Brittany rewound the video. She bumped up the audio, isolating the frequencies. "I'm a federal agent." She froze. Had the cops just assaulted a federal officer? She zoomed in on the man's face as he was pinned to the asphalt. There was no panic in his eyes, only a cold, calculating intelligence. If he truly was a federal agent, the Oakage cops had just signed their own death warrants. If he wasn't, they were just brutalizing an innocent man. Either way, the world needed to see it. Brittany didn't bother sending the video to the local police tip line. That would be like handing the murder weapon back to the killer. She didn't send it to the local Oakage Chronicle, which relied on police goodwill for access. She opened X, formerly Twitter. She created a burner account named Oakage Truth. She typed out a caption, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "Oakage PD. Captain George Vance violently assaults a complying, unarmed black man in a wealthy neighborhood. The victim claims to be a federal agent. The police don't care. We need to make them care. #Oakage PD #police brutality justice." She attached the unedited 2-minute and 40-second clip. She tagged the official accounts of the FBI, the Department of Justice, the state governor, and 3 major national news anchors. She took a deep breath, hovered her mouse over the blue button, and clicked post. The internet is a volatile, unpredictable machine, but it recognizes raw, unadulterated injustice when it sees it. For the first 10 minutes, the video sat in obscurity, garnering only a dozen views from bots and random scrollers. But then a prominent civil rights attorney in New York City with 2 million followers stumbled across the hashtag. He watched the video. He saw the sheer, unprovoked violence. He hit retweet, adding a single comment. "This is a kidnapping under color of law. Identify these officers immediately." The spark hit the gasoline. Within 30 minutes, the video had 100,000 views. Within 45 minutes, it crossed 1 million. The algorithm pushed it to the top of the trending page globally. The comment section exploded into a torrential downpour of rage, disgust, and demands for immediate federal intervention. In her bedroom, Clear's throat, Brittany watched the numbers spin like a slot machine, paying out a jackpot. Her phone began to buzz frantically with direct messages from journalists at CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, begging for the original file. The pressure cooker had just been placed on maximum heat, and inside the Oakage precinct, completely isolated from the digital firestorm raging outside, Captain George Vance was completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to end. At 2014 hours, the quiet, manicured streets of Oakage were violently awakened. It started as a low, rhythmic vibration in the chest, a deep thrumming that rattled the window panes of the sprawling houses near the municipal center. The thrum grew into a deafening roar as a matte black U-60 Blackhawk helicopter descended from the night sky, hovering a mere 200 ft directly above the Oakage Police Department. Its massive rotor wash whipped the decorative American flags in front of the building into a frenzy and sent loose gravel flying like shrapnel. A blinding millions candle power searchlight snapped on, painting the entire front facade of the precinct in an inescapable harsh white glare. Simultaneously, the ground shook. 3 heavily armored Lenco Bearcat tactical vehicles painted in flat FBI blue careened around the corner of Main Street. They didn't bother using the driveway. The lead Bearcat hopped the curb, tearing deep, muddy trenches through the pristine front lawn of the police station, coming to a screeching halt mere inches from the glass front doors. The other 2 flanked the building, sealing off the front and rear exits, creating an impenetrable perimeter of rolled steel and ballistic glass. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere of bored arrogance vanished in a fraction of a second. Officer Nicole, who had been painting her fingernails at the filing cabinets, dropped her polish. It shattered on the linoleum, blooming like a pool of blood. She stared out the reinforced front windows, her mouth hanging open in sheer terror. What is that?" she stammered, the color draining from her face. Behind the front desk, Sergeant Miller dropped his phone. The 911 switchboard was lighting up like a Christmas tree as panicked citizens called in to report a military invasion. He looked up just in time to see the heavy steel doors of the lead Bearcat swing open. A tidal wave of federal operators poured out. There were 20 of them, members of the elite FBI hostage rescue team, HRT. They were dressed in heavy level 4 tactical gear, Kevlar helmets, and night vision goggles pushed up on their foreheads. They moved with a silent, terrifying, fluid precision that local beat cops could only dream of. Every single one of them was carrying a customized M4 carbine, suppressed with red dot sights, sweeping the building. Captain Miller screamed, his voice cracking with panic, scrambling backward away from the desk. Captain Vance. In his office down the hall, George Vance had his boots resting on his mahogany desk, chuckling as he typed out a highly sanitized, fictionalized arrest report for John Doe. He frowned at the screaming, the sudden vibration rattling his coffee mug. He stood up angrily, adjusting his heavy gun belt. What in the hell is going on out there? I swear to God, if that's the fire department running drills again, I'm going to. He threw open his office door just as the front of the precinct ceased to exist. The HRT didn't knock. They did not announce themselves over a megaphone. They had been authorized by the U.S. attorney to breach a hostile environment holding a federal hostage. A breaching specialist planted a localized explosive charge on the center hinge of the heavy reinforced double doors. Boom! The concussive shock wave blew the doors completely off their frames, sending them crashing into the lobby and shattering every pane of glass in a 30-foot radius. A thick cloud of pulverized drywall and smoke billowed into the room. Before the dust could even begin to settle, the HRT operators flooded the lobby like a dark, unstoppable liquid. Red laser sights cut through the smoke, instantly acquiring targets. Federal agents, do not move. Drop your weapons. Drop them now. The commands roared out. A wall of deafening, coordinated sound designed to completely overwhelm the nervous system of anyone in the room. Sergeant Miller didn't even think about reaching for his sidearm. He threw both hands into the air, falling to his knees so fast he bruised them on the tile. "I'm unarmed. I'm unarmed," he shrieked. Officer Nicole froze, her hand hovering instinctively near her holster. "Hands in the air or I will put you down," an HRT operator bellowed, closing the distance in 3 massive strides. The barrel of his rifle pointed directly at the bridge of Nicole's nose. The red laser dot rested firmly between her eyes. Nicole let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper, throwing her hands up as tears instantly streamed down her cheeks. "Don't shoot, please. I'm a cop. You're a suspect." The operator growled, kicking her legs apart and throwing her roughly against the filing cabinet. Within 2 seconds, her hands were wrenched behind her back, and the thick plastic teeth of heavy-duty zip ties ratcheted tight around her wrists, biting into her skin exactly as her metal cuffs had bitten into Robert's. Down the hallway, Captain George Vance stood frozen in the doorway of his office. His brain, heavily insulated by years of absolute, unquestioned local power, completely short-circuited. He was looking at federal operators systematically disarming and restraining his officers. He saw the assault rifles. He smelled the explosives. His hand, moving on sheer arrogant muscle memory, dropped toward his duty weapon. "Do it." A chilling female voice echoed through the chaotic lobby. "Give me the excuse, George. Draw that weapon and see what happens." The tactical operators parted like the Red Sea. Stepping through the shattered entrance, illuminated by the flashing strobes of the Bearcats outside, was Supervisory Special Agent Monica Sterling. She wore a dark blue FBI raid jacket, her badge gleaming on her belt, and a look of absolute unadulterated murder on her face. Her hand rested casually on the grip of her Glock 19. George Vance looked at Monica. Then he looked at the 12 red laser dots currently painted on his chest, his throat, and his forehead. Slowly, agonizingly, the reality of his situation breached the walls of his massive ego. His hand moved away from his gun. He raised his arms, the flush in his cheeks fading to a sickly pale white. "That's what I thought," Monica said coldly, striding down the hall toward him. "You just made the worst mistake of your miserable life." The Oakage precinct, a monument to local corruption just minutes prior, had been entirely conquered. The 17 officers on shift were currently kneeling on the floor of their own bullpen, facing the wall, their hands zip-tied tightly behind their backs. An eerie, oppressive silence had fallen over the room, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of federal operators securing the perimeter and the occasional muffled sob from Officer Nicole. Monica Sterling stood inches from Captain George Vance. He was on his knees, his heavy chest heaving with panicked breaths. An HRT operator had already stripped him of his gun, his taser, his radio, and most symbolically the gold captain's badge from his chest, tossing it unceremoniously into a cardboard evidence box. "You can't do this," George stammered, his voice lacking its usual thunderous boom. He sounded small. "I am the captain of police. We have jurisdiction here. You breached a municipal building. The mayor is going to have your badge for this. I'm calling my lawyer." "You don't have jurisdiction over a federal kidnapping," Monica replied, her voice dangerously soft. She pulled a folded sheet of paper from her jacket pocket and let it drop onto the floor in front of George. "That is an emergency warrant signed by a federal judge authorized by the United States Attorney for the district. We aren't here for a chat, Vance. We are here executing a hostage rescue." "Where is he?" George swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. "Where is who?" He lied, attempting a desperate, failing bluff. We don't have any hostages. We brought in a vagrant, a trespasser who resisted arrest. Monica's eyes narrowed into slits. She leaned down, bringing her face inches from his. The man you assaulted, illegally detained and stripped, is Supervisory Special Agent Robert Hayes of the FBI. If he has a single broken bone, George, if he has a concussion, I am going to ensure you are placed in a federal penitentiary where the inmates know exactly who you are. Now I will ask you one last time. Where is my partner? The remaining color drained from George's face. The fake badge, the 1-800 number, the calm demeanor. It hadn't been a bluff. It had been a warning he had arrogantly ignored. Cell Block 4, George whispered, his voice trembling, holding Cell A. Take his keys. Monica barked to a nearby operator. And if this man twitches, put him to sleep. Monica turned on her heel, drawing her flashlight as she strode rapidly down the dark cinder block hallway toward the holding cells. 2 heavily armed operators flanked her. She reached the heavy steel door of Cell Block 4 and jammed the large brass key into the lock, twisting it violently. The door groaned open. The blast of freezing 55 degrees air hit her immediately. She shined her flashlight down the corridor, illuminating the pale green walls. "Robert," she called out, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I'm here, Monica." A calm, deep voice replied from the first cell on the left. Monica rushed to the door, peering through the reinforced glass. Robert was sitting perfectly upright on the concrete slab, shivering slightly in his underwear, his arms wrapped loosely around his torso. His left cheek was bruised and streaked with dried blood. The skin around his wrists was raw, red, and weeping where the metal cuffs had sliced him, but his eyes were sharp, unbroken. "Get this door open," Monica ordered. The operator keyed the lock and the heavy door swung outward. Monica stepped inside, stripping off her FBI raid jacket and wrapping it tightly around Robert's freezing shoulders. She didn't hug him. They were professionals in a war zone, but she squeezed his uninjured shoulder with a fierce protective grip. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," Robert said, standing up slowly. He didn't complain about the cold or the pain. "You made good time. You missed check-in by exactly 14 minutes. I almost blew a gasket," Monica said, a tight smile forming on her lips. "I brought you something." From her pocket, she produced Robert's thick leather wallet. She opened it, revealing his gold FBI shield, the one George Vance had laughed at. She handed it to him. Robert took the badge, his fingers, numb from the cold, traced the heavy metal seal. A profound shift occurred in the cramped, freezing cell. He was no longer a victim. Clear's throat. He was no longer a civilian at the mercy of a corrupt system. He was a federal agent returning to duty. "They put your clothes in an evidence locker at the front desk," Monica said. "Let's go get you dressed. We have work to do." Robert walked out of the holding cell. The mechanic in the opposite cell stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Robert paused, looking at the man. "Agent Sterling," Robert said, pointing to the mechanic. "This man claims his vehicle was illegally seized under civil asset forfeit. Add his case to the pile for the Civil Rights Division." "Done," Monica said. The mechanic's jaw dropped. 3 minutes later, dressed back T.